In the last episode of Build, we talked about why instead of doing a rebuild or a redesign, it may make sense to build a brand new product for your company. If you missed that episode, I've included a link to it below this video. In today's episode, we're going to dive into some of the best practices for keeping that new product on track. So stay tuned. Welcome to Build, brought to you by Pivotal Tracker. I'm your host, Purnima Vijay Shankar. In each episode of Build, innovators and I debunk a number of myths and misconceptions related to building products, companies, and your career in tech. In today's episode, we're going to be sharing a number of best practices to keep a new product on track as you're building it. And to help us out, I've invited Lisa Doan, who is a product manager at Pivotal Tracker, as well as Vera Reynolds, who is a software engineer. Thanks for coming back on the show, ladies.
Thanks, happy to be here.
Yeah. Let's do a quick recap from the last episode on why you decided instead of doing a rebuild or a redesign to build a new product.
Yeah, so initially we thought we were going to just rebuild Tracker, and when we went out into the world, we realized that the problem space was just way too big and that net was cast too wide. And so we needed to kind of follow the pain and find what were the most effective things we could solve for our users. You have to understand that Tracker does what it does well. Mm-hmm. Like, there are other competitors, absolutely. I'm not here to toot my own horn, but it's a pretty good product.
Yeah.
And so we found that there are other problem spaces that we could tackle that are adjacent to Tracker that could complement it in a nice way. And so that's how we ended up where we are.
Okay, so whenever we have the chance to build something brand new, we want to kind of start with best practices, new best practices. I'm sure you both experienced this as well as you were assembling your team. Mm-hmm. What were some best practices and how did you go about learning them?
So on the product side, we had to adopt a lot of new practices. So when Tracker was built back in 2006, product was less of a thing. But since then, things like lean startup have emerged, lean product, user-centered design, and we needed to catch up on those things. And so we brought in an innovation coach who helped us learn how to do experiments and really think about product in a lean fashion. And so we've been doing a lot of practices around that.
And I remember in the last episode you talked about how your innovation coach also helped you with a mission and a vision. Mm-hmm. So how did that come about, or what did that look like?
Sure. So when she arrived, we had been doing endless research, and so she recognized that we were paralyzed and that the first thing we needed to do is pick a direction, and that's what the mission and vision were tools to help us do. Where they came from is the designer and myself had done plenty of research in the years prior about what the major problems our users were facing on Tracker. And so we had a couple ideas of what we wanted to address with the new tool. And so those were incorporated during a workshop where everybody on the team was kind of throwing out their ideas of what they wanted this new tool to be, how they wanted to solve problems for users. And after, I think, a whole morning of just workshopping it over and over, we finally arrived at a mission that everybody could really agree on.
So what was the mission that came out of this?
I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. Our mission is to empower individual contributors on a team to align around shared goals.
So I've heard you throw around user-centric a lot. It seems like it's a new direction that you're going in. How is this different from what you were doing before with Agile?
Tracker was born by engineers for engineers. Mm-hmm. And for the majority of our span as a team, we've been a very engineering-centric team. A lot of our leadership is former engineers who worked on the product. All of our product managers back in the day were extremely technical. Like, I was the least technical PM, and I have a degree in computer science. And so we always had this mindset of doing the best engineering possible, but we were less focused than we should have been on what our users' needs were. Mm-hmm. And so that's been a huge cultural shift that we've tried to instigate with our new team, which is, let's think about the user first. Let's always question why we would build something before we build it. And that's a muscle that we've had to really grow and exercise a lot, is rather than just coming up with an idea and immediately building it, is let's go make sure this solves the user's problem. Let's validate that the user actually has this problem. Mm-hmm. And just really having a discipline around that.
Is that because the user is different, so maybe you're not dog fooding it as much as a builder?
We do actually dog food our current product.
Okay.
So that was one of the first, we were our own first user.
Okay.
And I do think that helps with keeping that front of mind. But as an engineer, I'm in Agile world, I've always been used to getting handed stories and not so much asking about why we were doing it. It may have been my experience, but from what we've learned from our users, that's not unique. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. However, we feel like a balanced team where everybody is involved and kind of like user-centric, to pull it up again, provides to better product.
So let's talk about those balanced teams next, because I think that's something that's new too, right, in your approach. What's a balanced team?
So we like to think about it in terms of 3 spheres of influence. And so you have a sphere that's very concerned with the user. And so typically that falls to a designer. And then we have the sphere that's concerned with the business. And so typically the product manager has been responsible for that. And then we have the engineering side, who's concerned about feasibility, who's concerned about building, using the best patterns. And so balanced team isn't about specific roles filling those, but it's that at any given time, someone can weigh in for each of those spheres. And so at some point, whenever you're making a key decision, someone should be able to represent the user, someone should be able to represent the business, and someone should be able to think about technical feasibility and the engineering impact of that.
Got it. So as you're moving forward and building this product, you have each of those spheres weighing in on the decisions.
Sure. And an example of that is when we go to IPM stories and
What's IPM?
Iteration planning meeting.
Okay.
And so as a team, we'll go through the stories that are coming up next and talk about any concerns that we might have. A good example of that now is sometimes I'll bring a story to the team and the engineers are capable of challenging me and saying, okay, what is the evidence that we should actually build this?
Good.
Whereas before, the engineers were like, okay, we'll build it. But there wasn't that conversation about what is this actually doing for the user.
Got it.
So that's a great impact that we've seen.
Yeah. So while you are a new team that's assembled, you're still operating in a bigger organization. But I know your goal was to kind of stay more startup-y, and the best startups are always keeping an eye on time as well as money. So how did you hold yourselves accountable?
When we first started, this was a huge challenge for us, is we went out and started to do research, but it sort of became this endless research thing, and there was no one asking us like, people were asking us when are you going to build, but we couldn't tell them. We had no idea. Everything was just so vague and open at that point. And so we introduced a concept which I believe comes from Lean Startup of metered funding. And so in the startup world, you're only alive as long as the money is there. And so you're always trying to convince your investors that they should continue to give you funding. In the enterprise world, that doesn't really exist. Like you have a team, there's funding for you already, and so you just continue using that. And there isn't anyone who's making sure that you're making good on it. And so we introduced what we call a growth board. And so we have some stakeholders within Pivotal across different business organizations who will meet with us every 6 weeks and will hold us accountable to our learnings. And so every 6 weeks we show up and we say, this is what we've learned and that's how it's affecting our direction. And they make the decision on whether we should pivot, persevere, or kill the product.
So it's great that you're following this framework of pivot, persevere, and kill, but let's get real here. I'm sure there was a time where you felt like, is there ever going to be a light at the end of the tunnel? And if so, how did you reinforce or remind people of these best practices?
Oh yes, there were times.
Yeah.
And I haven't been with the team for as long as Lisa has, so I'm sure she has even more time that she can conjure up. But for me, there were definitely moments where I questioned what we were doing. I questioned why we were doing it. And that's where that balanced team really shone, because it wasn't just me from my engineer perspective that was having those questions. I think having designers, PMs, and testers with us was really, we were kind of uplifting each other and helping each other move along and kind of get through those tough spots.
Lisa, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of times where we were just really concerned about, is this even the right direction? What are we doing? There was so much ambiguity, and that's an extremely uncomfortable place for many of us. The place we came from is, we thought of features and then we built them, and there was this surety in it. And the new world we were in is like, let's go find problems, let's validate those problems. And the practices were new, it was a huge cultural shift. You're asking people to do things that are outside of their role. And so there was a lot of just stress for the early months and just trying to figure out, is this even viable? Are we even doing the right thing? Was this all just a mistake?
And so how did you keep that team together?
Like Vera said, we had great people on our team, and we still do. And we hold each other accountable to our learnings. And so fortunately, having all these different perspectives can bring a lot of light. And so sometimes as PM, if I'm very down about something, then the engineers can bring up a point like, oh, but the user said this in this one user interview, which is something we never had before.
Oh, cool.
But now they're involved and they can bring up just as much evidence as I can. And it's extremely helpful when times get difficult.
Yeah, so it's having another basically set of eyes and ears to pinpoint things that might have gotten overlooked. That's awesome. I know you're currently in beta, but let's switch gears and talk about some of the positive outcomes that have resulted from doing this new product.
Absolutely. We've seen a tremendous cultural shift, not just in our team, but across the broader Tracker team as well. And so as I mentioned, we came from a very engineering-centric place. And so we started to see the other teams start to adopt a lot of lean practices as well. Another huge benefit is as soon as people saw us start to get momentum, they saw that it was directly related to having a vision and mission. And so now those teams have also gone out and established their own vision and mission, which is helping to drive their features forward and their work forward as well.
And last time we talked about stakeholders. So coming full circle, how did they feel about this?
They're really excited. Our growth board is really enthusiastic and supportive of us, and they're also able to connect us to different parts of the organization. And so we've seen tremendous outreach from different parts of Pivotal that are very interested in what we're doing and very excited to join and help us. And so that's been a wonderful outcome of ours so far.
They still keep us on our toes.
Yeah.
But, it's good to have that positive energy.
I know you're in a beta phase right now. How are you going about testing?
One example I can give is just last week, an engineer and we walked over to someone on a different team and we asked them to use our tool, and we sat there and we observed them going through the various steps and just cringing as they get to steps and we're like, ooh, we got to clean that up, we got to fix that. But also seeing that it helped them in their day-to-day job, and that was really exciting.
Yeah, so doing some usability testing.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
We're continuing to do evaluative research, and so that's making sure that they're not just on our very specific persona, but we're validating that the problem exists beyond just that persona and how we could potentially solve for various scenarios.
I know we've covered a lot, and there's probably a lot more we can talk about when it comes to new products and staying on track. What's one thing you would love our audience to just always remember?
I would just say if you're an engineer, just question what you're building and question your PMs.
Nice. No, that's great. All right, well, thank you both, Lisa and Vera, for coming on the show and sharing some of these awesome best practices.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, that's it for today's episode of Build. Be sure to share this episode with your friends, your teammates, and your boss, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive more episodes of Build. Ciao for now.
This episode of Build is brought to you by our main sponsor, Pivotal Tracker. We'd also like to thank our Platinum Patreon patrons, Corky Bites, The Developer Show, and Jamie Hand. Finally, thanks to the following new patrons. If you've enjoyed watching Build, please consider becoming a patron and contributing on Patreon at www.patreon.com/build. You can pledge $5 a month or more, and your pledges will go towards helping us produce and promote the show. In exchange, you'll receive perks like being mentioned in the credits, digital copies of our latest book, and Platinum patrons will receive exclusive perks like monthly online group coaching, where I provide more hands-on coaching on a number of topics related to entrepreneurship and leadership. To find out more and contribute, please visit www.patreon.com/build.
So what was the mission that came out of this?
Oh, sorry, what did you want me to say?
Yeah.
Let's do it again.
So what was the mission that came out of this?
So to paraphrase it.
Did you do anything fun to celebrate?
No.
Not yet.
Oh, okay. I thought that's what
We should. We came to San Francisco.
Ronan's buying us lunch. Yeah. That's a celebration, right? Welcome to Femgineer's Confident Communicator course introductory video series. I'm Purnima Vijay Shankar, the founder of Femgineer.
And I'm Karen Catlin, a former tech executive who's now an advocate for women who are working in the tech industry.
For the last 22 years, I have been speaking in public, and for the last 8 within the tech industry. I have given a TEDx talk, I've been a guest lecturer at Duke's Pratt School of Engineering, an entrepreneur in residence at 500 Startups, a mentor in residence at Techstars, and was the founding engineer of Mint.com.
I am on my second career. In my first career, I spent 25 years building software products. I started out as a software engineer and over time moved to the executive level, where I was a vice president at Adobe Systems. Now, in my second career, I'm an advocate for women, which means I do a lot of public speaking about diversity, about women's leadership topics, and I've given a TEDx talk.
The Confident Communicator course is a live online course that Karen and I co-teach together once a year for 8 weeks. In this video series, we're going to give you a sense of what the Confident Communicator course is and what you'll get out of it.
If you sign up below for this video series, you'll learn about the challenges Purnima and I have faced learning the craft of public speaking ourselves. You'll learn why we decided we just couldn't keep all of this knowledge to ourselves so that they could learn to become better public speakers and confident communicators. And you'll hear from students who have taken the class about how they have become more confident communicators.
You're going to get a behind-the-scenes look at the entire course. You'll meet some past students and see how they went from being shy and nervous to poised and confident communicators. You're also going to meet employers and sponsors who found the course valuable enough to invest in and send their people. And finally, you'll get some sample lessons so you know the material that we're going to be covering. Sign up below to receive the first lesson immediately, where you'll understand why it's not good enough to just be heads down. You need to speak up to get the recognition you deserve. Ciao for now.